Evil punishment designed to be worse than death.
Ew, this is by the infographics show.
Criminal who crosses the line could find themselves facing the gallows or the headsman at
I was
any
gonna say
point
some of
throughout
these will
history.
probably
Although
know.
crossing the line could mean anything from murder to just annoying the king. However, in many places, the death penalty isn't the worst thing that the courts have to offer. Here are
I'm not even for the
15
death
of the
penalty.
evil punishments worse than death
I was
administered
gonna say,
throughout
but saying
history.
that the death
Number
penalty
15,
isn't the worst. That's
Flaying.
because
Let's turn the clock back.
Yes,
this
to
would be
Syria,
horrible.
If you
roughly
get your head just chopped off,
850
then it's like
BCE.
that's pretty quick.
Right, that's what I'm
Ruler
saying. That's
Ashur
'cause these are not
II
quick,
was
painless
known for
death.
his brutal treatment of captives and rebel
Ugh.
leaders. But one method created a special dread for
This is
victims.
horrible.
Using a special set of knives,
can't
the
even think
torturers
about
would
it.
slowly remove the unfortunate victim's skin. And this
Oh.
was something they practiced a lot.
So they gut
not
him.
only knew how to remove
No,
the
they
skin
just
smoothly, but
remove
how
the
to keep the
skin.
victim alive
Yeah, they gut
for
him,
as long
kinda.
as possible. To ensure this, they'd start the cutting at
Not
the
really,
lower legs, thighs, and
like,
buttocks.
just literally peel
all
the
this
skin
without
off of you.
proximity to vital organs, making it more likely the victim would remain in agonizing pain
Right.
for longer without bleeding out. This was a highly effective form of torture.
Yeah,
Oh.
like
Just
that.
wanted
So no, you'd be
information, they were likely
alive.
to get it.
Oh,
You're not
oh,
taking your
oh.
guts out. You're just literally pulling your skin off.
Yeah, you know, sometimes like
Literally
you know,
skinning
when
you
you're in
alive.
so much pain that you just black out.
I think, yeah, they
So
have
I don't know if they
to.
don't. I'm guessing they don't.
I would
black
bet
out.
they have to, because your body's response is to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What
I
makes-
can't
I don't
imagine.
get what makes people come over with
People
this
are
type of things.
evil.
Like,
Some people are evil, especially history, man.
it quickly. A victim who gave their captives what they wanted could survive the beginning stages of flaying, but the
Ugh.
risk of infection would be high. But for
That's true,
most,
yeah.
it was a prolonged and terrible execution. So how long could someone survive a flaying? The combination of blood loss,
Days.
infections, shock from extreme pain, and hypothermia from exposure to the elements without the protection of your skin
Yeah.
means most people could survive few days at the most after being flayed.
I was gonna
The
say,
skilled Assyrian torturers knew how to remove the skin smoothly, often keeping it in one piece for it to be displayed as a horrible flag of warning. They were clearly proud of their skill, and torture is immortalized
Clearly.
in many of their art pieces from the era.
Things
And
people
while the
do to
Assyrians
people.
eventually passed into history, the method became
Things we
less
do to
common,
each
but
other.
it did
Yeah,
not
right?
die out. It was a common method of torturing religious heretics in empires for more than 1,000 years, and while using it on a human today would be frowned upon,
Yes, it
it's
would.
still a common skill for hunters who want to keep an animal's pelt
Well,
intact
yeah.
for use. But that's nothing compared to what the Persians came up with.
Uh-oh.
Number 14,
There's worse?
the boats. Flaying usually kills
Okay.
people after a short period of intense torture, but other methods keep the pain going for a lot longer. When a soldier named Mithridates murdered the brother of the king wanted him to suffer. Sure, the king's brother had been attempting a coup, but it didn't matter. He ordered the soldier to be
Attempted
taken to the
a coup.
boats.
We say, hey,
This
you still
wasn't
killed my
exile.
brother.
It was something
Right.
much worse. The condemned could be taken to a pair of boats, with one lying on top of the other. Holes would then be cut in the boat for the victim's head, hands, and feet. So he would be trapped inside. But then the real torture begins.
Oh,
and
it's
it
like
starts with
waterboarding.
What? Yeah.
the
And then like
condemned man is
the weight of your
force-fed a
head and
mixture of
stuff.
Milk and honey,
Ew.
pumping him full of the sweet mixture until
Milk
he's
and
nearly to
honey.
the point of nausea, and left in the sun with the sticky substance drying all
Ew.
over.
Oh yeah,
his
bugs all over him.
Ooh.
And from there, nature
Yep,
takes its course.
bugs.
The sweet mixture starts attracting
Ugh.
insects, who land on the man's body and begin sucking it off of him, creating a
Ew.
constant feeling of irritation. Joining the flies will be bees and wasps, which
Yeah.
will be painfully stinging him.
And you're gonna be
inside the
hot.
boat, the man's bloated body will release excrement, which will attract worms and other vermin.
So gas and all that
Inside
stuff.
the boat, they'll start
Man.
biting at his body and eventually burrowing in, leading him to
Ew.
die a slow, painful death from his body being consumed by vermin. This technique
Oh my
seems
God,
to
that
have only been
sounds
used in Persia,
horrible.
although it horrified the Greco-Roman historian Plutarch so much that he made a special mention of it in his biography of the sadist king who invented it. Was this just one madman's creation, or was this a common fate for criminals and traitors in Persia? The answer might be
Oh my
lost to history.
gosh.
It wasn't the only time animals were used to bring death. Number 13,
Well, yeah,
Poena
no.
Coulée. Roman law was one of the most advanced systems of law the world had ever seen at the time. And that also meant the judges could get a little more creative. When a judge had a suspect in front of him who had been convicted of killing his father, he decided he deserved more than just a simple execution.
Oh, no.
And there would have been some surprising supporting characters in the mix. First, the convict would have been severely whipped, and his head would have been covered in a sack, at which point he would have been sewn up into a large leather sack. But he
Ew.
wouldn't be the only one in the sack.
Like,
He'd be
literally-
joined by a collection of live
What?
animals, none of them friendly.
Yeah,
At
and
which
they-
point
they
the whole
start
collection
attacking
would
him
be
either
thrown
side.
in water to drown, with the idea that the animals would savagely attack the unfortunate man in their panic as they all sank down to their watery deaths.
Oh
No
my
word on if
gosh.
the animals were convicted of anything. But what animals were chosen for this terrible
That
ritual?
sounds horrible.
This varies, but one thing that seems consistent is that they were all capable of causing pain. One common choice was a rooster, whose beak and talons were
Yeah,
capable
that
of
would
inflicting
be
a lot of
brutal.
damage quickly. Also common was a venomous snake, who's more likely to bite when panicked. Not even a man's
Yeah.
best friend was safe.
A
wild
dog?
was
You put a
common
dog
addition.
in there?
The fourth varies, but several reports point to a monkey being included,
Oh,
which
God.
might seem like an odd choice
mean-
unless you've been attacked by them and seen how quickly they bite and claw.
Obviously,
One
it's
thing
horrible
is
for the
sure,
human, but
this
for
wasn't
the
a role
animals
any of
as
them
well.
were
They're just
auditioning
throwing
for.
them in the
While
water,
this
making
was
them all
mostly a
suffer.
Roman invention,
Yeah.
it's reported that it was revived to a certain extent in medieval Germany. There, only a cat and a dog were used, and they fought like, well, you know.
Cats and
Unlike
dogs?
other forms
Yeah,
of
cats
execution,
and
this
dogs.
one wasn't about prolonging the torture of the victim. It was simply about making those last few minutes before drowning as horrible as possible.
Oh my
But no Roman
gosh.
execution method was more infamous than this one. Number 12, crucifixion.
Well,
It's
okay,
one of
we
the
all
most
know
famous
this
images
one. Yeah.
in religious history.
And
The
it's
Christian
horrible when you
Messiah
think about
Jesus
it.
being nailed to a cross for angering the Roman authorities. But while it's mostly associated with religious martyrdom now, it was a common Roman execution
Yeah, it was-
method.
yeah, it was
So
definitely-
common
yeah,
that
they
religious
used it a
texts
lot.
refer to thieves and other criminals sentenced for hanging alongside Jesus. And whether you were a rebel rabbi or a common thief, there were few worse ways to die. It served not just as a slow death, but as a warning to others. The crosses were placed in a public square, and
Yeah.
the condemned were frequently jeered and tormented by onlookers as they died a slow death.
Yeah.
But unlike
Sounds
many of the other
horrible.
methods in the list, crucifixion didn't deal a fatal injury. It just set them up to die from other factors like blood loss and asphyxiation. And the torture started early. The ritual would start with the condemned being forced to bear the heavy wooden cross on their back.
Yeah, your arms would be
Often
so
while
tired,
Like, you have to
man.
walk a
after the
long
cross
way
was
with
Yeah.
it, yeah.
They would be nailed
You'd
to
be
it
exhausted
through their
and in
wrists
pain.
and hung from
I
it.
can't imagine the
Sometimes
pain of
feet
being
would be
nailed
as
through your
well, although
wrists.
evidence
Yeah.
isn't consistent.
Ugh.
With their arms splayed out to the side,
And
they
then
would be left to
hanging?
hang for
Yeah.
anywhere
Like your
from
weight
hours to
hanging
days.
from that?
Because
Yeah,
their
I
whole
know.
body weight was
So
held by their arms.
painful.
The typical cause of death would be trouble breathing due to the pressure on the lungs.
Suffocation.
However, elements like heart failure, dehydration, or infection from the wounds inflicted by the crucifixion and whippings can also spell the end of the conflict.
Yep.
However long they lasted, it would be an agonizing end. But because this execution method isn't immediately fatal and due to its religious association, today a small group of zealots chose to have themselves temporarily crucified as a penance ritual.
What?
At least it's
Yeah, I think I
Oh
read
my
about stuff like that.
gosh.
And I don't think they get whipped. They'll just have like
But they-
the nails go through their arms and
Ew,
stuff.
oh my
They'll take the cross and
gosh.
they'll walk with it.
And then
and
they literally nailed them to it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that
I'm
was-
assuming they like passed away. These people, like they
I don't know, I don't-
volunteered to just be not
Well,
martyrs.
I don't know
but-
if these people pass away. They just probably stepped up for a few hours, and then they'll probably get like
Oh.
help from the doctor or whatever. I mean,
Golly, that's insane.
yeah, I mean, but it was definitely way worse during that time
Well, yeah,
frame
during
because
then.
like not
Everything was
just
just
whipping,
more
but
brutal.
they'll scrudge you. Well,
Yeah.
with the scrudging you, they'll just whip you and then snatch the skin off your
Ugh.
off your body and stuff, and
Like chunks
your
of-
bones be
chunks of
showing.
you coming
And also,
out.
I think I read that like. Because it was also about embarrassing them too. So they'll like put you on a cross
Mm-hmm. Ridicule.
like naked, like nothing. Everybody sees
And
you
ridicule
naked.
you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, ridicule you. Yeah. So that'll be torturous, man.
Yes, it would
Like
be.
horrible.
It's ancient history as a punishment, right? Not quite. It was used in places like Japan and Burma as late as the 1800s, with some isolated reports of it being
Japan
used
did
to
it too?
torture prisoners
That's
of
what I
war
said.
during World War II. It wasn't the
What?
only method that stood the test of time. Number 11, immurement. Sometimes the
Immurement.
most horrible thing to do
Don't
to someone
recognize
is
this one
to
right now.
do nothing. One of the most ancient
Oh.
methods of torture was to take
psychological
a
break you-
convict
to
and
psychologically
in
break you down.
alive somewhere and then just walk away. Out of
Ew.
sight, out of mind for those dealing out the punishment.
just don't
But
give 'em
for the
food or
condemned,
anything.
They're left alone
Yeah.
in the dark with nothing but their mind to keep them company as
Yeah.
they slowly die a
Like
painful
solitary
death
confinement.
Yeah,
either
they're definitely
dehydration
like
or
psychologically break
asphyxiation,
them down.
depending on how much air there
Make
is
you
in
go
the confined
insane.
space. If the condemned is
Yeah,
buried
being
alive
buried
in a
alive.
coffin, as
Yeah.
That would be
has
the
happened
worst.
accidentally to people wrongly declared dead, they'll likely be dead within hours from a
Yeah,
lack
you're
of
running
air.
oxygen.
But if they're kept in a larger space, it's likely to be fairly longer and more
Oh my
painful. While
gosh.
this was commonly used as a method of execution, it has also been used for human sacrifice. But one
What?
case was more famous than any other. The Vestal Virgins of Rome took a sacred oath to become priestesses dedicated to the goddess Vesta. They had two main duties: to maintain the sacred fire and to maintain a vow of chastity and celibacy.
Oh no, and
If
So they
they
couldn't
did
get
the
them in.
latter, the punishment was dire. They would first be stripped of all their honors and ritually scourged. Their fellow virgins would dress them like a corpse, hold a mock funeral for them, and carry them to a small underground vault. There,
Damn.
they would be left in what looked like a small room, oddly containing a couch, lamp, and even some food. And an area where the vault was built would be filled up with dirt and buried. The
Oh
horrible
my
ritual
gosh.
was conducted around 10 times over the 1,000 years that the Vestal Virgins
Oh my
existed.
gosh.
This continued as a form of punishment for thousands of years, but how severe it was depended on the circumstances. The murderous Hungarian Countess Elizabeth Bathory
Wow,
was
look at
immured
that.
within
Yeah.
her own castle, but she was supplied with food and lived for 4 years in her palace tomb.
Oh,
Now let's get into the
okay.
Middle Ages, which were called the Dark Ages for a reason. Number
Dark
12,
Ages.
the breaking wheel. Europe loved its public
Oh.
executions, with everyone
feel
from
like this
murderers to
one I might
heretics to
know.
common thieves facing their turn at some point. But
Okay.
for those deemed truly loathsome, a worse fate than the gallows awaited them. No one knows when the breaking
his
wheel was
legs
first
all
created,
twisted up,
but the
boy.
first
Yeah,
Like a
'cause they-
reference
pretzel.
to the torture device can be
Just
found in literature from the 6th century.
spin 'em,
Oh,
I
body.
think.
Would be taken to a public stage in time
This
to
is
the
what I
floor,
remember where you,
at which point the giant spoke
pull 'em.
wheel would be rolled
Hmm?
in.
Okay, I was thinking of the one where you like stretch them.
Oh, okay.
This is maybe.
Oh,
a
yeah, I
little
know you're
different.
talking about too, man. But
Yeah,
yeah,
but
man, they
this is a
twist them
little
up like they're a
different.
pretzel or something, man.
I don't know how this
Like,
works.
man.
Oh.
The goal of this first stage of the execution was to exact extreme pain, starting with breaking the legs of the convict by dropping the wheel on their shins.
Oh,
Sometimes
gosh.
this would be followed up by killing the inmate by dropping the wheel on their neck, but this wasn't common because
I
the
can't believe that
public
would even
demanded
kill
more
you
blood than
easily.
that. In most cases, the poor convict was lifted up once their limbs had been broken and bound to the wheel in agonizing pain. Their broken limbs often let the authorities snake their arms and legs through the holes. The breaking wheel was then raised on a pole, and the inmate was either left to die, beheaded, or lit on fire. The body was often left up for display on the
fire.
wheel as scavengers had their way, making this resemble crucifixion in many ways. However,
Yeah, it
there was
kinda
always a
sounds
way
like
out.
that.
If the convict fell off the wheel while still alive or survived the execution, they were deemed to be spared by God. Their injuries
Wow.
were treated, they were typically pardoned of their crimes, and were in a rare position of being one of the only people to
That's
survive
crazy.
one of the worst
They'd
punishments
never be
in
the
human
same,
history.
though. They'd be
The
like,
worst
No.
punishment often lasted a long
Especially
time,
back
but
then.
few were
Yeah.
as disturbing as this one.
Ew.
Number 9, Impalement. How disturbing does a punishment have to be for the man who inspired Dracula to go, yeah, I like that, I'm gonna make it my
Just like
signature."
impale you on a
Despite the
stake.
association
Yeah.
with the
and leave
infamous
you.
Vlad Tepes, the Romanian leader, didn't create the punishment of impalement. It had been used since ancient Mesopotamia
Ugh.
as a way to punish particularly hated criminals. It was a simple method, but almost unspeakably brutal.
What do
A
they
large
impale you?
sharpened
Do they
stake is
start from, like,
taken
your
and inserted up the
anus?
backside
I
of the
don't
know. It goes up,
unfortunate
like-
convict,
Yes.
and pushed
Yeah.
forward until it emerges
Ah,
through the mouth,
boy.
almost always causing fatal damage. They were supposed
I
to
was gonna
serve
say,
as
I
a
would think that
message
would
as the
kill
stake
your
was
brain
then
pretty
raised and
quick, though.
planted
Yeah.
in the ground, with the victim still attached to it. In the most brutal cases, fields of these victims were planted as a
Ugh.
grim warning to anyone thinking of invading the territory. At least it'd be a swift death, though, right?
Right,
Maybe,
that's what I was
maybe
thinking.
not.
It
While
depends on if it
poorly
hit
trained
the-
users would no doubt pierce the internal
Yeah.
organs and lead to the person bleeding out in agonizing pain over a few
Ugh.
hours, some more modern users figured out how to thread the stake effectively and follow the spine. This caused minimal damage and allowed the person to linger for days.
Ah,
man.
that sounds
Days.
horrible.
Really
Did you
horrible,
say
y'all.
more modern users? Yep, this horrible tactic did not die with Vlad the Impaler.
1915.
It was used extensively by the Ottoman Empire, most infamously during the Armenian genocide that began in 1915. There are also
What?
reports that it was used by the Dutch rulers of the East Indies during the colonial era. Vlad,
Ugh.
no doubt,
So they
would
did
be
that too.
proud. This next
20th
technique might be the
century.
most infamous execution method of the Middle Ages. Number 8, the rack.
Yes,
Most
this
of the
is what I
punishments
was
on this
thinking
list
of,
are
the rack.
execution methods that get a little too ambitious with prolonging death. But punishment isn't the only goal of torture. Sometimes the torturers need some information, and the old guard was willing to get a lot more brutal than
Ugh.
slapping people with a phone book. Enter
A
the
phone book.
rack. A
This is
simple
what I was
device that
thinking.
looks like an old-fashioned washboard, but this device wasn't used to clean clothes. It was
Ugh.
used to create pain. The wooden frame featured a roller at both ends. The victim's hands were tied to the top end, while their legs were
Ugh.
attached to the bottom end.
This just
As
sounds
the interrogation
like-
Yeah.
advanced, the torturer
can't imagine
slowly
feeling
rolled
your
the rack,
whole
extending the victim's arms and legs
body
until they could
separating.
give no
Yeah.
more, and it only gets worse from there. Unlike the other methods, the rack doesn't deliver immediate fatal injury. Rather, it deals out
No.
slow-level pain that gets worse and worse as the ligaments, cartilage, and bones of the arms and legs are stretched beyond what they can handle. This can quickly break a person down as their shoulders and
take it
hips
anymore.
separate
I
and their
bet,
limbs
bruh.
are ruined. Even if one
Yeah.
was able to escape the rack, it's unlikely they could walk after it did its work.
Well, right.
This also
You
kept
just
the
literally
person
killed
immobile
all
for
of the
future torture,
tendons.
such as using hot coals to burn them. The rack
Ew.
was so feared that sadistic interrogators would often use the rack on one person and force another to watch to try to break both of them down. The use of this device mostly died out in the 1600s, but it was reportedly revived in 18th century Russia.
What?
But it
Wow.
wasn't the most common method of torture in the Middle Ages. Number 7, auto de fe. The
Okay,
Spanish
this one I don't think
Inquisition
I've
was
heard
one of the most
Yeah, I know, heard of
infamous
this.
affairs of religious persecution in the world, as the particularly brutal authorities built on the Roman Catholic Church's enforcement of laws. Opposing religion was largely banned. Converts were surveilled and interrogated to ensure they weren't keeping their old faiths, and anyone suspected of heresy was subjected to extreme torture under the authority of the infamous Takamata. And for those who confessed, an even worse fate awaited them. They would be subjected to a ritual of public penance where they would be paraded before the public and abused, wearing garments bearing their accused crimes. Then the authorities would proclaim their guilt or innocence. For some, it would be innocence, as they would collapse in gratitude and relief. But for most, it would be guilty, and horrors awaited them. The punishment would typically begin with public whipping and torture, but it would only end one way. The convicted would be tied to a stake, kindling would be piled under them, and they would be lit afire
Burning alive?
and burned to death while still alive. It was a horrifying way to die, but the only grace of mercy was that many passed out from the intense smoke before.
Yeah, that's the only thing. But you'd still be feeling the burning before that happens.
But most of those killed by burning over the centuries, from the 15th to the 19th, were either religious minorities or critics of the dogma and tactics of the Inquisition. And it stayed in Europe. Despite persistent rumors, no witches, accused or otherwise, were ever burned in Salem. Not all these punishments are famous, but this next one is no less disgusting. Number 6, Schwedentrunk. The Swedish drink. Sounds delicious. Maybe like a lingonberry soda.
Like you're drinking,
but for those who were being invaded by Swedish troops during the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, it was no laughing matter. This wasn't so much a traditional punishment as a method of torture and robbery used by ruthless soldiers, many of whom were out of supplies and intended to take them from the locals by any means necessary. It's a simple technique. Force your captives to drink as much as they possibly can, until they give you what you want. If you've ever tried to drink a whole gallon of water as part of a dare, you know this can get very unpleasant very quickly, because your stomach can only handle so much. But this wasn't just drinking water. The Swedish troops would tie the person up and use a funnel to pour the liquid into the person's mouth. And the actual substance would be an unpleasant surprise. Sometimes it would be water, sometimes it would be boiling water, causing terrible internal burns. Sometimes it would just be disgusting, like urine or sewage. In addition to the possible poisoning or infection, this could cause the person's stomach to stretch or burst from the massive amount of liquid. For the soldiers who wanted to add a little additional pain, they would then beat the victim's swollen stomach and even stab them with spears. It's no wonder that most of the victims in the path of this torture learned to just give the soldiers what they wanted and pray that that would satisfy them. Now let's head across the pond for something that isn't as funny as it sounds. Number 5, tarring and feathering. It almost sounds
we've
like a
all heard
cartoon
about
gag.
this one.
An unfortunate convict gets a bucket of tar dumped on him, and now they're all sticky.
But hot
And here
tar
come the feathers.
is not
They
funny.
look like a giant chicken.
That
but
hurts.
this isn't slapstick comedy. It's a feared fate for those who angered the mob in 18th century America. The tradition might have started much earlier. It was first referenced in an order by Richard I in 1189.
Wow, that's a long
but it
time
didn't
ago.
catch on until tensions started rising in the
century.
British colonies in North America. Angry rebels in the years before the Revolution would protest tax laws by kidnapping British officials or suspected informers, coating them in pitch tar and covering them with feathers to publicly humiliate them. It was considered a grave insult and good sport for the rebels. But the truth was actually much worse. How do you get the tar nice and sticky? You heat it up. While
It's
this wasn't
hot.
often the case, often tar poured on the victims was boiling hot. And when it dried and came off, it would take pieces
I was
of
gonna
burned
say, I don't
skin
think it
with
would come
There's
off
no
easy at
report of
all.
anyone dying from being tarred and feathered. Many of the victims were left in agonizing pain and had permanent burn scars.
Because
The
I bet you
punishment
like
became
literally
rarer after
lose
the revolution,
pieces of your
but it was
skin.
hard to keep good torture down. The Mormon founder Joseph Smith was tarred and feathered by anti-Mormon radicals in 1832, and a German-American farmer named John Meintz was subject to the punishment in 1912. His crime? Not supporting war bond sales during World War I, and likely just being a German-American during wartime. This next one might be a bit of a catch-22. Number 4, trial by ordeal. You've been accused of a horrible crime, and the penalty is death. The good news is you can get out of it. You just have to do what? Trial by ordeal goes back to antiquity, when the most common form was trial by combat. This one is actually rather fair. You just go into the arena, fight a guy, and if you come out alive, you're free.
Only
You're innocent,
what,
like gladiators.
just
gladiator
commit this other
who,
murder.
you
This
know.
would fall out of favor eventually, but elements of it persisted in
I
the
should
duels
defend
that
my
became
honor.
common in the West. But in other cases, the odds were stacked against you. These trials would often resemble torture, such as the accused being sentenced to trial by fire. In this one, the accused would simply have to walk barefoot over a field of hot coals or hold a red-hot iron. Sometimes the person simply had to accomplish the painful task, but more often they would be checked for signs of injury and only deemed to be innocent if they somehow managed to escape without getting burned.
No one's gonna not
The
get an
odds
injury if
aren't
you're
looking
holding a
great
hot
here,
iron.
But one
Yeah.
twist on the trial by ordeal was particularly sadistic. When witches were accused and placed on trial, they often proclaimed their innocence. But how do you prove something that probably doesn't exist? Those who trialed the apparent witches had an idea. The accused witch would be tied up and submerged in water to drown. The idea was that the witch would be able to use supernatural powers to escape. So if she managed to escape, she was clearly a witch and would be put to death. So how would someone prove their innocence?
What?
Simple.
Right.
She's still gonna put it to
I was
death
gonna
anyway.
say, if she exactly.
So
if you didn't survive, then you were innocent, but you were killed.
That's a no-win-win situation.
Exactly.
Lose-lose situation.
That's craziness.
Rat torture. How do you turn
Oh,
rats?
yeah,
this
that'd
is
be
like
horrible.
making rats eat you
Like put like a
alive.
bucket over their stomach, and put the rat there and light it on fire.
Yeah.
Or light it up and make it hot.
As the tide rose and the River Thames rolled in, rats would climb into the prisoner's cell and viciously attack him. Some doubt this happened since rats typically don't attack humans unprovoked.
They don't?
But the reports might have encouraged some people. Because in the 16th century during the Dutch Revolt, someone did manage to weaponize the furry plague vectors. A pottery bowl filled with rats would be placed upside down on a prisoner's
this is
body,
what you were
and
saying.
hot coals would be placed on top of it. As the bowl heated up, the panicked rats would desperately gnaw at the prisoner's flesh to try to find refuge from the heat. Someone called PETA. It's grotesque and it worked. Rat torture isn't a particularly common form of torture simply because it depended on living animals doing what you need them to do.
Well,
but
that's
the
true.
fear that rats create made it an appealing option for particularly
Rat
cruel
torture.
dictators. And it made an appearance in
Oh.
military dictatorships in South America during the 20th century.
Really?
Argentina in particular was infamous for using a
Interesting.
retroscope to insert live rats into people and letting the creatures dig their way out.
Yeah, because
Ew.
I think they can actually like
Inside
dig,
of
yeah.
somebody?
A man
Well,
threatened
yeah.
his
Well,
kidnap
I don't get how to
victims
get them
rats
inside.
to
I don't know
get
if they
into
sew them up or
grants
what.
That's what it sounded like.
This next torture is especially horrible.
But I know like
because the
they can
victim
like
doesn't
bite
tell
you or
Yeah,
something.
they can
Number
dig,
two,
for sure.
Yugitsume. Japan's criminal scene is powerful and secretive, and agents that fall short of a task assigned by their boss often face severe punishment. But unlike the American gangsters who might find themselves wearing cement shoes, members of the Yakuza often face another penance, less deadly but bloodier. In order to atone for their offenses, they must sacrifice a piece of themselves, particularly a piece of their little finger. This is not
Yeah.
only extremely painful, but is considered to weaken them because the little finger is key to maintaining the grip on the hilt of a sword. But that hasn't stopped it from being used for hundreds of years. The penitent Yakuza member begins by laying their hand on top of a clean cloth. They then use a particularly sharp knife called a
boy,
tanto
let's think
and
about my
slice off
hand.
their little finger just above the top knuckle. They then wrap up the fingertip in a package and present it as an offering to the head of the crime syndicate.
To
Why would
say,
they want it?
"Sorry,
Tradition,
here's my
because not only
penance."
was this ritual used as a method of penance, but in the past it was used as a form of payment by gamblers who fell behind on their debts.
Oh,
The good news
dang.
is, if the agent screws up again, they can do the ritual again. The bad news is, they're gonna run out of fingers eventually.
Yeah.
They only have two
Finally,
pinkies?
Sometimes there's nothing more terrifying
Yeah.
than nothing. Number
Ugh.
1, white torture. Solitary confinement is torture in
Oh.
itself, stripping someone of all their comforts
This
and
is like the
isolating them
absence
from
of
any
all
human
sense.
contact.
maybe.
Yeah.
But usually, they at least have a sense of space that they can use
Yeah.
to orient themselves. White torture strips them of even that by
Yeah.
placing them in a cell of nothingness. The prisoners deprived of color, giving them a cell where the walls, floor, and ceiling are entirely
kind of
white.
all look
Not
the
only that,
same
their
and-
clothing is also white, and any food given to them, usually plain rice or porridge, is white as well. Taking this to the extreme, the cell is equipped with bright neon
So
tubes
they'll never
that
see,
prevent
like,
any
colors
shadows
again.
from falling on the cell. And the
Yeah.
soundproof cell leaves them with nothing but their own mind. And that mind slowly starts going
Yeah, I
insane.
think it
An
cracks
extreme
so
form
crazy.
Of sensory
Yeah.
deprivation. This was reportedly used extensively in Iran against political dissidents who could
Huh.
be held for months or even years in one of these cells. It also showed up in
Dang.
Venezuela, and international human rights groups even accused the United States of using it on accused terrorists in Guantanamo Bay, using
Interesting.
goggles and earmuffs to block out their senses. But in all these cases, the facilities are tightly guarded, meaning all anyone has to go on is the reports of the victims, and those are harrowing, with
Wow.
many claiming the
Yeah.
extreme sleep deprivation left them unable to sleep even after they were freed, and haunted them for years afterward. What about the children? Watch worst punishments of children.
Boy,
Man, it never ceases to amaze me what
things
humans will do to
yeah.
each other. Insanity on some of these.
I don't know, man.
No,
I think-
sorry, all of these.
a lot of them was like horrible and
Right.
stuff, but I don't know, the worst is one. I mean, you got the
I don't
crucifixion,
know.
but you
There's
also
so
got
many
the
of
like
them are horrible.
when you get your body skinned up
The
and
flaying?
stuff.
Yeah, that
flaying.
sounds-
That's just like complete torture because
What?
you can live for a few days. You know what I'm saying, and
Well,
then die.
What about the one where you were in two boats and they stuffed you full of like milk and honey and
Yeah.
then stuck you in there so you get all bloated and then
Yeah.
literally let the bugs eat you
Eat
alive?
you, yeah, that'd be torture too. This is just imagine like
Not only
bees
are you feeling
stinging
bloated
on you,
and disgusting and your
fart-
stomach
farting and
hurts,
stuff, farting.
then you're getting eaten
Gassy.
alive by bugs and rats. Like, that sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Ugh.
That's the things that we human beings do. It's
disgusting.
like sickening. Like, how do you like
It
come up with this
is.
type of torture? You
And
know what I'm
why? Like, how can you hate somebody so much
Yeah.
that you would do that to somebody?
It was one like clip of her. It showed like the witches or whatever. To
Yeah.
prove they're not a witch,
Oh.
You drown them, and then if they can save themselves,
Then they are a witch.
And then after that, they execute them.
So if they didn't save themselves, they were innocent, but you already killed them.
Whoever came up with that, man, I think they just wanted to kill whoever.
They clearly didn't care.
Yeah, they just wanted to kill whoever they believe was a witch.
Oh my lord.
You know what I'm saying? Because if she was really a witch and she had powers, then you think she used her powers to like curse them or something.
Right.
I don't know.